Then your principle 5 is to make sure that you have vigorous oversight. And I know my colleague Eric, who's not participating now, I see, is really strict on vigorous oversight. So that is your role, and that is what you do. So you need to take control of your fund. You need to do it through having the vigorous oversight and making sure that you're in charge of your fund. And obviously you're going a long way in completing what we're doing now to enable you to take charge of fund matters. So there they talk specifically about oversight responsibility. You need to do regular assessments of all the people involved in your fund. I don't see it happening a lot. I know specifically in a lot of funds it happens maybe once every 3 years. So you must just check how many times you need to do this. And specifically review of fees. I mean, how often do you really review your fees? Not every year. It's a huge exercise. You might do it every 3 years. So somewhere you might have a policy specifically talking about how often you review your fees and costs. It should be in each individual service level agreement. So your administrative agreement should say, this is what you provide me, this is how much we pay you, and this is if I include all the costs associated with operating the fund. You will sign such an agreement whenever you're taken up by the fund or somebody is doing your administration services for you, or any consultant that you employ. Just want to quickly check. Okay, so that is still talking about principle 5. If you go to number 6, so you already have expert advisors. So you appoint an accountant once per annum, and actually once every 3 years. An investment advisor manager, where your assets are invested within Old Mutual or with Sanlam or with Stanlip, that investment manager gets a fee. You might have somebody like an investment advisor who's doing your group life and disability policies and gets a commission for making sure claims are paid on time, funeral, disability, and group life cover. So there's a distinct role of the financial advisor. It should be not be all financial advisor. It should be separate actually as a point. Or any lawyer, you might employ a lawyer when you have a difficult case happening and you need some representation in the High Court. Any other experts, a labor expert, an HR expert you might need. So you are allowed to appoint expert advisors. Number 6, when you appoint them, you should have a service level agreement. So even if we stop here, and at least the example we can use in these principles, we can tie it back to every aspect of the Pension Funds Act. An accountant, if they talk about expert advisors, so you should have an accountant appointed and who is registered under the Accountants Act. So that accountant will have a service level agreement in place with your fund. The actuary will do the same. You will sign that before you do anything. And within that, we can even go back to number 5, where we say vigorous oversight and also review of fees. That ties back into your fees. So your service level agreement, the reason why you will do it is because of bad service or fees, expenses, or any other matter that might be applicable to you. So that's number 6. Number 7 is risk management. Now, risk management is a whole policy that we need. So if you want to make a note under principle 7, risk management, it's not, I can't see it specifically anywhere in the Pension Funds Act, but I know specifically PF 130 says you should have a risk management process. Your risk management should be in place. The way we explained this last time, and we're going to do this in module 6, is you need to identify the risks that you're facing in your fund. You have a policy for this. And this risk management policy will, as I said, identify the risks, you will say, what is the impact of that? And remember, we said the impact there is, I just want to quickly do this because this is quite important. The impact of your risk will be, firstly, we will look at the severity, which is between 1 to 5, and we look at the frequency between 1 to 5, and we determine the severity and frequency as an applying your mind exercise. There's no right or wrong. So a severity of you not being compliant with the Pension Funds Act is 5. For you, you think that it might happen, could be a 1. And if you take 1 times 5, it gives you 5. So to me, that is quite a low one. The next one could be where you say the severity is 5, for example, the severity of not paying contributions. That's not severe on the board. So it should be a 1 on severity. On the fund, it's got, can't hear anything. Anybody else cannot hear anything?
Yes, we are fine. We are fine.
Yeah. Zen cannot hear me properly. Zen, I hope we better now. I'm going to record this and send it to you in any case, if that's in order. So then I said, what about the employers not paying the contributions? The severity on the fund is not that severe. It's maybe 1 month outstanding, depending where you are down the line. So maybe you put it on a 1 times the frequency that it will happen will be a 1. It's not going to happen often. Has it happened before? So that gives me a severity of 1. So and then the last one, it will be the administrator not investing the premiums on time. Will be a severity, not that severe. If they are late, they need to pay the interest as an investment manager. So remember, it goes to the asset manager, and they will take, for example, in a service level agreement, I've seen up to 10 days to invest the members' monies. So now we say, what is the severity of that asset manager taking 20 days? It's not that severe because they will need to pay back the higher of the interest on what is owed to the fund or the investment return, because members cannot be in a worse position. So therefore, you need to determine. So I'm thinking about a severity number 5. Does anybody have an example for me of a number 5 severity? Let me see. Which could be a 4 and 4 type of thing, which happens frequently. Let's say you're not acting according to the rules. The rules state you need 6 trustees. You go through your agenda pack and there are 4. The other 2, you're missing 2 trustees. The rules say you must have 6. So you must immediately elect 2 more. If you don't do it in time and you don't do it at all, you're obviously not compliant. So to be non-compliant to me sounds like a severity, but we must understand that a lot of funds get sort of said to be non-compliant. It could be a 3 times, and the frequency that it will happen is, it happens a lot actually. So if I take times 3 equals 9. So the severity of such a matter could be 9. So when you then go and assess this and you want to reduce this, so that is the example of your risk management under principle number 7. So then next what you will do is you will say, okay, that last one we said, the fund does not have the trustees elected. Now we know that in our fund, although it's a 9 as severity, But what we do very well is that we have a lot of legal experts on our fund, and they check the rules thoroughly, and it's a HR process. So we believe we have in this risk already half of it under control. Let's say 5. So if you minus the 5, it puts that risk at a final value of 4. So that severity at the end for you as a fund, for that example that I'm giving you there, is a 4. So when you look at a 4, you might say it's going to be down on the list. But you must constantly monitor these things, write down new risks. And they say, very importantly, PF 130 says you must communicate this risk management to your members. I've never seen this in my life, but it says you need to communicate this to your members. I haven't seen funds do it, actually. Then if you look at principle 8, talks about the investment performance. This is obviously important, and I know we believe that we have it boiled down to. Luckily, our market is really sophisticated with a lot of great investment managers. And we have standard investment policy statements. So this is policy then number 3. We've spoken about the risk management policy, or let's call it policy number 2 we're mentioning. So we have risk management policy and your investment policy statement. It never gets reviewed annually. I haven't seen this. So it must be reviewed annually on funds. And if you need to know what needs to be in there, read through this slide. I'll email this to you. Your investment policy statement should say who the investment advisors are, who the custodian of the monies is, whether the fund has a social responsible investment policy, social responsible investing. It's obviously some will deal with that in the 4th module. And it goes on. So you need to look at this, plus there are examples if we start to do, and we look at the pack you will be receiving, I reckon there's going to be an IPS in it with some performance and those things which we need to take out, and we're going to have to put it then down on your paper. You're going to say investment A at 8% and B at 7%, so 8 should be the best. So we're gonna look at practical implications of this investment policy statement and how to make sure that you are covered in any of those questions. Principle 9, very importantly, communications. One of your duties, you need to communicate to members. It's even further now where we not just communicating, but there's something called counseling. It comes to the fore with the new regulation 37, 38, and 39. And it also deals with communication. So there's a lot of communication issues that is covered, but not only in the principle, but I'm showing you here in the new regulations, they talk about communication. They talk about you need to communicate to your current members and your pensioners in PF, I think it's PF 90 and 91. Plus, you need to have a communication policy that will say how you communicate to your members and what do you want to communicate to your members. So that's something that you need to look that you have in place, and there is an example of that in the material that you have. Well, I'll make sure I send it to you if it's only in the minute pack. I see we good evening. Deboho. Hi.
Hi, sir.
How are you?
Good on you.
Good. Okay. Then so if you look at principle 9, it's still access of information. There's the communication policy. So I reckon that is the third policy. Policy number 1 was the number 2 was the investment policy. Number 3 is the communication policy. And the first policy I forgot now. See how short my memory is the risk management policy. So you need to have the risk management policy in place, investment policy, communication policy. Principle 10 of PF 130 deals with member and beneficiaries. And once again, if I look at this principle, it talks about educating, counseling members to be able to understand investments and for members to understand the risk associated with the type of investment they choose. So principle 10, once again, ties into your investment policy statement. And it covers issues, and if I go through it, the board should communicate aspects of the operation of the fund, including the performance of the fund investments. Okay, it comes to the fore, I've said to you earlier, where the Act says trustees need to communicate to members, and also where the Act says you need to do counseling for members on investments twice a year. That's the new regulation 37, 38, 39. There's not a lot of regulations we need to know. And I'm throwing the numbers. There might be 5. That's 3 of them. So it's not like we're studying a lot outside this. And oh my word, there's so many regulations. We will make sure that you're covered with all of them for you to understand. Principle 11, 12, I'm finishing off on these. So principle 11 talks about the employer and the sponsor. So it just says the fund owes the employer and sponsor a duty of good faith. So I don't know what that means exactly. I think it refers to both parties must respect one another, and times where they can meet and cannot meet should be discussed with the employer as well, because a lot of trustees are in top management. Principle 12, deal with service providers. Once again, yeah, principle 12 really to me covers a lot of the things where you can make a lot of points in this examination. So those approved service providers didn't service level agreement, and you get it by doing what? Let's see who can win something. Who wants to earn something nice? Who can tell me what we call the process of inviting new service providers? What do we call that under the content that we cover? It's really simple. Alex?
You said the tender.
Yeah, yes. What do we call the process? A request for tender. So RFT. So it's called an RFT. So just make sure that when we look at service providers, you have a service level agreement in place. I don't think you need to overthink it. I just think that the service provider does a lot of things. The service provider must be able to say they're not going to divulge any information from members to a third party, therefore obliging to the POPI Act. But luckily, our service providers do have all their things in place. So the service level agreement, we can go through an example. I don't think it's that important, but you must understand that when you are not happy with the service provider, you go through the request for tender, and you must study the steps. I think it comes up in module 3, request for tender, where you firstly remember what we said, like a car, you want to buy a new car. So what do we start? You're going to say, okay, I firstly need to select cars, different cars. So obviously going to the market. Here you will not go to the pension fund providers. You will invite them. You'll phone them. Whatever you want to do, you will then so whatever you do, welcome everybody. So whatever you do, you'll do, when you talk about a service provider, in the tests for us to make sure that we cover service providers, the question will be, you're a board member, you've recently appointed ABC Investment Advisors as your investment consultants. They are underperforming for the last 2 years, grossly underperforming. How will you handle that? So firstly, you must have a service level agreement actually in place that covers performance. And it covers the way you will deal with investment advisors not performing in line with the benchmark or their targets. The board cannot delegate its responsibility and therefore can be jointly and severally liable for the actions of their mandated agents. So the board can be liable. In other words, your approved service providers need to be checked through the service level agreement. If you need a new service provider, you will go about it firstly searching the market, getting a short list in, or getting everything in, sort the approved providers, choose 5 of them, shortlist, they call it, to come and present to you, or send you their proposals. You can do any step you really want to do. You don't. If I talk about service providers, if you want to put in there, so if we've taken the 5 best service providers out, we're going to look at their costing and we're going to choose the best 3. So there's any step that you as a fund take in requesting a RFT, requesting a tender, requesting for tender. We will still do that in module 3. So once again, at the bottom, really boring work, but the policy should be established which sets out the frequency of reporting by the administrators and service providers. So the policy, we're not really looking at a policy. It's going to be a service level agreement or agreement between you and the administrator. You don't really need a policy, although if you go fine to PF 130 and Principle 12, it mentions a policy. So if you look at it technically, I think I have seen funds with a policy where they put down if our administrators need to report back at every meeting and send us the following type of documents. So just check that as Principle 12. Talk about approved service providers. Principle 13 just says, talks about authorities and effective supervision, talks about the adjudicator. Now, once again, if there's a complaint, as I said this morning, from any member, the Pension Funds Act deals with it under the adjudicator section 30. But we know practically the member will go to the trustees first, in writing, tell the trustees what the query is all about. The board will have 30 days to compile a reply to the member. If a member is still not happy, in the past, he could go to we can go specifically, you can maybe put in an appeal to the adjudicator, try to have more evidence in place. The adjudicator sometimes might request that. But if there's no further action, a member can go to the higher court where we will then pay for an advocate. So what we've seen now is the FSCA has introduced another tier of a committee that deals with complaints. It's called the Financial Tribunal, which deals with complaints that is not resolved by the adjudicator. And then obviously the FSCA can inspect your fund rules and things that are required to be on hand at your offices at any time. I'm gonna stop this section here. There's a couple of more things, but I will then just give you, let me just see if the legal sections are here. We can cover some of the legal aspects, but I'm not gonna talk further into this. I don't think there's a lot more that will be asked from you. I think we just need to understand PF 130 and also everything that deals with matters of that. So your module 1 deals with firstly PF 130 and those 13 principles. Then your module 2 will deal with other aspects. For example, they talk about a strategy. So I'm looking to chapter 2, for example, strategy to meet the objectives of the fund. I haven't seen any questions specifically for this, but there's a planning section here, which I believe funds are not planning properly. And I don't know if your fund is planning, but you need to have a calendar in place for the year coming to say these things are going to happen. And it's really good practice to look at a certain budget, a forecast for the next year. So from a planning perspective, I know funds are missing that opportunity of planning. They're really just putting some planning down on the agenda. There's no thoughts through that in any measurement. I'm just looking at a couple of other things. If I look at this one, and I'd come to slide 88, so as you see, there's a lot of slides. I'll condense it specifically for this. That's why I'm stopping here at I think this could be chapter 2. Service provider procurement. This is going to be a question for the exam. So what we need to see is, let's see if there's a couple of things that comes out of some of the content that that's in module in chapter 2. So there are a number of reasons that a fund may wish to conduct a RFP process. RFP process is really important. As I said earlier, the newly fund is established fund seeks to put these services in place, or the fund has requested or decided to change these administrators. So when we look at service provider procurement, this will be a question I can really put my head on it. Let's call it 5 points out of 100. I mean, if you have the 5 points, it's only 45 to go. If the pass rate is 50. Okay, so firstly, you will be a new fund seeking to put these services in place, or you want to replace an existing service provider. You might have a change in circumstances. You decide to do a due diligence, for example. And you decide that you need a new provider because your fund has different needs now. So that slide I will keep in. Then there's the process. And I'm going to just underline this. Oh, it's too much. Let me just go back and go to these steps. And as I said, if we need to spot, I will definitely spot search. You search. You first have what involves searching, possible providers, drafting, distributing questionnaires. So you might have a questionnaire or a tender form. Don't need always a questionnaire. You can have a tender form. It says, I need this type of person. We've done a practical example in our classroom sessions. You evaluate, you get the information in. So SEI, interview or pitch. Sometimes we will ask them to come to the offices to do a pitch for us, and then we'll start to negotiate the contract. So if I look at these SEIC, cease. I think there's 5 marks for you. You've got a feeling like that about that. Then obviously it will depend on what service provider you're looking at. So as we discussed in the class, we spoke about maybe you're going to ask them about your financial position, your experience with other retirement funds. Give us some customer references. Also, please, important work to study. It's just a good overview. I think it's a really good overview of the service of the provider's experience or performance. Service providers competitive. So obviously you need to ask your service provider some of these questions. Let's say I need to have a new principal officer that I need to appoint. I will ask the principal officer of his or her financial position in that firm, that company they're presenting, the experience with other funds, some references, qualifications. Have you had any legal cases against you? your experience. Do you have all your documentation in place? That's just the fourth last point there. Why do I choose you? Do you have enough insurance in place if there's a claim against you, if there's a mistake you make? And how much am I going to pay you? Once again, please, it's important that you know some of those to guide you when answering the questions. I'm not saying you're going to need to answer 8 of these. You might have 4 or 5 that you can mention. But here's a typical questions on the retirement fund. Examples are what type of fee. Let's say we have an asset manager and I continue with service provider, types of fees charged. Do you have ad hoc fees? In other words, if I ask you to do my retirement fund service level agreement or my investment policy document on the fund, how much will it cost me? How long do I have to be a client of yours if I don't like working with you anymore? Do you have all your functions in-house or do you use other providers? And how secure are your offices and your computer systems? How many times a year would you communicate to members, etc.? Okay, I'm sure it gives you a great idea of where we are heading on this. I'm not going to go further into those things. Then obviously the service level agreement. I think there will be a question about the service level agreement. So if I look at components of the service level agreement, I look at service categories. In other words, what do you do for me? If you're my benefit consultant, do you do legal work? Do you do administrative work? Do you make minutes of my meetings? Do you have the secretarial role? Then obviously acceptable ranges of service quality. You're expected to do the following for the fund. Give us 4 report feedback, sitting on 4 board meetings, handling 10 legal cases for us, maximum a year. Whatever you want a consultant that you appoint to do, you need to stipulate what is it in there, what is being measured. In other words, you want to measure those outcomes. That's a quality you want. You need these things from a person like that. If it's an investment manager, you need them to invest your money, give report backs, attend meetings, etc. So you'll measure those things. And then what you'll say, you'll find a way to every year to decide if he or she did not perform according to their duties. So you could have a questionnaire that you do. So if I go back and I look at your questionnaires, I think if we look at them, a lot of the questions that you can ask are in those biannual questionnaires. So that's just on service level agreement. I'll do that. Slide is also important. Involve three steps. And then I've spoken a lot about these. So I'm going to say for now, that is module 1. Let's take a 10-minute break. Then we will commence with module 2. I'm not going to, as I said, spend a lot of time. I'm going to spend about 20 minutes, just give you an overview because I already covered a lot of module 2. But I this morning I did do the other some of it. So if we can be back by 19:15, will that be fine? Is that too long? 19:10, 7 minutes.
Yeah, 19:10 is fine.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, it's 10 past module. If we look at module 2, module 2 speaks to the Twin Peaks model, which was introduced in 2011, where, and specifically it comes from 2007, 2001 even, where we saw the terrorists hitting the Twin Towers. Obviously, so when we look at specifically that, cause for the financial sector to say, okay, we need some legislation for people not being able to give terrorists any money. And therefore we saw that we saw the FICA Act, which talks about identifying suspicious people in all financial sectors. When you deal with a client who's got a lot of money, you don't know where it comes from, it's all cash, you need to go onto the UN's website and see if that person is not a wanted criminal or somebody that's got to do with terrorism. So it's a law. You as a trustee need to do the same, and that is why we saw that you need to act as a whistleblower. So under this act specifically, you've got a duty to serve your members and whistleblow things that you're not happy with. But if we look further down to the Twin Peaks model, is when the Treasury is shut down. They also said, but also if we look at the credit crunch in 2008, where every bank gave everybody money to buy a house, and then they refinanced the house again. So everybody's house was ballooned with the monthly premium and nobody could pay their bond, and that whole market collapsed. So even from 2007, we also know that that was also a factor when it comes to the Twin Peaks model of being safer and regulating a safer financial sector. So the Twin Peaks is a comprehensive and complete system. And that is really what the whole financial industry is all about. It starts with your industry, the pension funds industry specifically. There are two regulators established, the FSCA, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, and the South African Reserve Bank. So the one, which is the Reserve Bank, looks after the macro policy. It looks after interest rates. For example, when we know that the Reserve Bank has a specific function to regulate the money supply in South Africa. The more money there is, the higher the price go of products, because everybody buys more. And for them to reduce money in the sector, if you raise interest rates, your consumer don't have any money to buy products, and those products, the inflation comes down. That's why we're seeing we are in a high inflation, because our inflationary environment, we're getting knocked by the Reserve Bank Committee specifically on increases in the repo rate, and therefore banks have to obliged when they make a loan to the Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank pay their money at a specific rate, they must still make their profit as well. So everybody makes money, and obviously that. Let me just get my bearings. The Reserve Bank then monitors the prudential side to the business or to all financial institutions. And we see the FSCA to supervise the conduct of financial businesses. So if I do that and I say prudential, social safety and soundness of banks. So the Reserve Bank still looks after the banks in our country. And those institutions that also, I won't include that, because if I include insurance companies, it depends on what type of products they sell. But let's go for the definition. I'll send it to you like that. So the FSCA wants to see, and if that is the South African Reserve Bank. So the Reserve Bank supervise the safety and the soundness of all banks still. So the FSCA doesn't get involved with banks. The Reserve Bank also looks at after insurance companies and other financial institutions, which I need to check why that is included. While the FSCA, which makes sense to me, supervise how all financial services firms, who are they? Who are all the financial services firms? If you think in terms of short-term, long-term pension funding, investment management, there you will find in each of those, you will find the aspect of a financial firm. So all the Allan Greys, all the Hollards, all the Santums, all the Sanlums, all the Momentums, all the Liberties, all the financial advisors need to be able to show themselves as being conducted in the correct way under the FSCA. So that's the FSCA's major task, is to make sure that we all behave and we do everything in line with what the Act says. That includes the pension fund trustees. So the Financial Sector Regulation Act was established, and specifically was established to make sure that we enforce that regulation, the Twin Peaks model, and the two new players in the financial services market. So I'm not going to go through the following slides. Here they talk about that act specifically and what it promotes. So it's in your workbook, the Financial Sector Regulations Act. The object of this act is to achieve a stable financial system that works in the interest of financial customers and that supports balanced and sustainable economic growth by laying down certain things. So it starts off by saying we want to be financial stable. It's A. B is there must be safety and soundness in financial institutions, fair treatment of financial customers, the integrity of the financial system, prevention of crime, financial inclusion, transformation and confidence in the financial system. Then if you look further to this act then establishes the Reserve Bank and the FSCA, and you can go specifically and you can see what they do and how they oversee, even if you go through the slides. I'm not going to go into detail. So I'm going to move forward. So if I look at the retirement fund landscape, so the FSRA replaces the registrar with the commissioner of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. So registrars have become commissioners. So in future, just make sure that we call the registrar the commissioner. There's an Ombud Council. There's the FSR, as I said, established that tribunal, which is now the next step after the financial, in our environment, the financial services or the pension fund adjudicator. In our new environment, that pension fund adjudicator will become the pension fund ombud. So they're looking at, I don't know if it's already changed, but they're looking at changing it. If I go to the Pension Fund Act specifically, if there are any important things I can take out is your duties. I don't think you're going to get a question on your duties, but you know by now these are your duties. You must act in that way. These are common law duties. In other words, it is now being said and explained in the Act as well, but it was actually established for any trust. So if you're in charge of a body corporate, or if you're in charge of a medical scheme, you need to do those certain things, and it's the same for pension funds. Trustees need to act in good faith and with due care. In other words, make sure you work hard to get to a conclusion. Don't just take one side of it. Make sure that you investigate the whole matter. You shouldn't have a conflict of interest. In other words, secret profits. Being a trustee, you must act impartially. You cannot act on behalf of the employer. You need to act from the member's perspective. You need to invest monies. If this goes well, then everything should be fine. I think if you can continue to make sure that your monies are invested properly, that is where trustees are often measured from outsiders, although we know that it's not that easy to time anything, but obviously you have good advisors as a board. Your duty is to know. It's important there is you've taken up this position, but you cannot say, I did not know, I'm new, or you need to obviously read up on matters and make sure you to take this then seriously. So if I look at the Pension Funds Act of 1956, you need to make sure that you understand the act. I just want to mention quickly about legal issues. I'm not a legal expert, but I know there are different types of laws, and specifically in our case here, we mention statutory law, which is passed by Parliament, and that is the Pension Funds Act is obviously statutory legislation. You have to follow the act. Then we also have our common law and customary union legislative aspects, which we include in pension funds. But if I look at the act specifically, section 4, it's really quite easy. I think everybody is scared of the act. I will take out what I think is important. A board here, section 7 says at least 50% should be elected from the members. So it says all funds are required to have a board consisting of at least 4, of which at least 50 are elected by the members. In other words, the members must elect at least half of your board or more. And there's a minimum of 4 members. You must make sure that this is not an easy thing to manage always. We look specifically at the Constitution. It can easily get where the 3-year term is up and the board is not acting in line with legislation. This has happened many times. So in your next meeting, you need to make sure that you understand on your board that will say when you're elected, when you're coming up for an election, and you need to look there specifically your terms of office, and you must know your quorum. So if you have 12 trustees and your quorum says you need 8 and there are only 7, then you cannot have a proper meeting. So make sure that you know your quorum of the meeting. And this question, I've got an idea, it's going to be a question in your exam paper about, they might give you a board of trustees and they want to ask you, look at the constitution of this fund and tell us which trustees are out of term. That could be a question. I think it's a good question. Okay, so I'm going to go further. Umbrella fund, retirement annuity funds, not that important for us to understand now. It's something that you can read up further. It's in the content, but they don't need trustees. As for example, the retirement annuity fund sits with, let's call it the Liberty Escalator Retirement Annuity Fund, sits with Liberty, and there's no law that says Liberty need to ask the member of the retirement annuity, because it's an individual product, to be a trustee. The law doesn't, the administrator or the underwriter of the fund can act as the board member on that. They still need a board because there's a lot of legislation that is similar to to pension funds. And then umbrella funds, it's really quite similar, but umbrella funds, when it's underwritten, don't need the 50% member representation. And I think this might change not long from now. I don't know what your views are as a board. Section 7 talks about liability. Okay, if we look at section 7, liability, we know that you're liable. So in other words, if I look at liability, you need to act in good faith and due care. And section 7 just says you're liable, wholly or partially, but you're liable for actions that the fund takes. Here they talk about liability of a board member, and it's just an example of the board member and issues that's appropriate to them. If we look at the FSCA publishes Directive 8, talk about gratification, Directive 8, Director inter alia limits the value of gifts to trustees of 500 per annum from service providers. So, but you've already known that. Just to give you an example of conflict of interest, then the section on the principal officer is you need to have one, you need to appoint one within 30 days after the fund is registered. That's not an issue on your fund. I'm going to move forward. Just further, the Act talks about the rules of a fund, and you might get a question on rules. If you amend rules, that you must get it to the registrar within 60 days after you've done the resolution. So in other words, you've got 2 months, and the registrar won't accept any changes that will affect the financial condition of the fund. So therefore, you might ask for more information from the fund, and you need, as a board, get back to the registrar. And I think they talk about, I don't know how many days. I think it was just back, I think it was 180 days. I'm not sure, but for now, let's keep it at the registrar. You need to get your rules that you change to the registrar within 60 days. It might be a question in the paper that will take you to a rule change, because that's part of your minutes would be a change of rules that you need to sign off. And it might be a question that will come up on rule change and how we change rules. And I've said earlier, we've done a rule change in our class. It's just purely explain the rule, what's wrong with it and why you're changing it, and sending it to the FSCA. Your consultant normally assists you in doing rule changes. Section 13A deals specifically with payment of monies to a fund. So payment of contributions. It's a big subject currently. We know that there's a process in place. Anybody who's involved in a company's financial affairs will be held liable because the company is not paying the contribution over. That's how the law sees it. I think there's now new possible legislation out that says basically you need to go to police station and open a case against those employers. So it's something that we will check when that gets more closer to home. Section 14 deals with Section 14 documents. I don't think you're going to really get a question on Section 14s. Section 14 is it's where a bulk of members transfer from one fund to another fund. We call that transfer. Must be done according to Section 14 of the Act, and therefore Section 14 deals with amalgamation and transfers. You're not allowed to transfer any money without the registrar's approval. And here's some more information on transfers. So if you look at a specific transfer, you must notify the registrar and submit all the documents within 100 days of the effective date of the transaction. So if you say, I'm going to transfer all members from this day, you have 160 days to submit, or 180 days, 6 months. Might be a question, I don't know. It's just maybe nice to know, well, you have 6 months to submit to the FSCA that you're going to transfer these members. The registrar might ask you for a evaluator report to make sure that funds are in line with the legislation and that funds don't jeopardize members' benefits just simply moving into any type of fund. So there's some questions asked from both parties, the transferor fund, which is the fund transferring the money, and the transfer or the refund receiving the money. So transferor is the fund transferring, or I've heard from legal people that you say the fund transferring the money plus the fund receiving. There are two funds. They need to put the information together, send it to one another, which is submitted to the FSCA. So that's all those things happen in the 180 days, plus obviously a schedule of member and values at a specific date pulled from the system. So there's a Word document and there is a spreadsheet of members when you look at Section 14s. And when the registrar says there's a section 14 transfer certificate, you receive the certificate, a fund has to pay that transfer within 60 days. So if you receive the certificate, you can't sit with the money in your fund, you must transfer within 60 days if it's approved. Accounts just says you need your fund to be audited, section 15. So your fund needs to be audited every year, which is done, I'm sure, in your fund. I see some funds quote on this every year. There's auditors giving a fee. Obviously, you need to every year then get a quotation in for that ad hoc service, which is called auditing report, which reports back to how much money the fund has received from members and how many claims were paid, and also how the investments grew, if there are any rules and issues outstanding with the FSCA, basically reporting back on the holistic, not just the financial position of a fund. That's why when we do module 5, it's about accounting. It's really a lot of questions. Luckily, we're not going to need to be accounting experts. We're going to have to just answer a couple of questions from a oversight perspective, which we will see if we can cover that out of exams we can master and look at. But that's module 5. So account says every year you need to do that. Every year you need to submit that. Evaluator section 16 and 17. Sometimes a fund need to do evaluation every 3 years to determine if there's enough assets to pay liabilities. I don't think it's necessary for us to become defined benefit experts. It is just somewhere where through the rules of the fund and the way the fund is being funded from the employer and the employee, there could be a gap in funding if you don't evaluate the financial position of the fund. And I'm going to give you an example. Let's say the employer, let's say we have a defined benefit fund. Let's make the defined benefit fund example, and the employer, the fund is totally overfunded. Remember, then the employer is allowed to reduce his contribution. So therefore, every 3 years, an actuary need to balance the fund. But for now, every 3 years, we need to know from a legislative perspective, an actual real valuation is done every 3 years. Or if you get exemption, you still need to submit some information on that. Section 18 says what the FSCA does when you're not in sound financial position. Every year you give them, so those financials being done needs to be given to the FSCA within 6 months after the financial year end of the fund. Then if the registrar finds that there is not enough money in your fund to pay claims, so specifically when it's lower than 95%, so it will tell you liabilities total. At the end says how many liabilities does fund owe, how many people, how much. So if you look at long-term liabilities, it could be that the fund owes members plus, maybe it could be another creditor, but let's say the members 100 million, but if you look at the assets, you add them together, it gives you 95 million. The registrar needs to know how you're going to fix that problem. Therefore, evaluator needs to show the registrar that if the employer increases his contribution, we're going to be fine in future. That's an example of a fund not in financial position. I don't think your fund has that type of arrangement in place. Section 19 deals with investments. If I can mention something here, you can invest up to 5% in the sponsor employer. Okay, so as part of this section of the act is they mention this specifically. If you want to invest part of your money, and I would assume it will say specifically your employer, you can invest up to 5% of the fair value. So if you have 100 million in your fund, you can invest 5 million in your participating employer under section 19, and it's also written into regulation 28 that deal with investments. Could go up to 10% depending on what the arrangement is and if it's agreed to by the FSCA. If you, I'm going to talk about home loans. I don't think there's going to be a question on home loan. Remember, section 28 deals with, section 28 specifically deals with if you dissolve a fund, you go through a voluntary dissolution process that says there must be rules in place. So an actuary once again will be appointed to dissolve the fund, say who gets what, and then close the fund and give you a costing, how much will it be. So the FSCA needs an independent person to evaluate your fund, and therefore an actuary normally is the type of person that a fund will appoint to do a voluntary dissolution. It's where members will receive their shares. It can lie open. Members can then complain after shall lie open for 30 days, and these things must lie open. Members must be able to lodge their complaint for periods of no shorter than 14 days. I don't know if those two dates will make any difference, but I'll give it to you in the slides. Section 30 deals with the adjudicator. We've spoken plenty about him. I'm not going to go through an adjudicator case. I think in operations we deal with it in the next module. I've spoken about the adjudicator example. I think it's, if anybody has some questions, you can refer to these modules. Section 37 of the Act says the minister can give you penalties. So from time to time, 1,000 Rand every day could move up, and they won't maybe necessarily change the Act, or they'll change the section, or they might change it via some note, if I'm not mistaken. So if you look at, you can be fined up to 1,000 Rand as a penalty. I can mention section 37D. I want to get to that. So what is allowed as deductions? So firstly, we see tax on benefits are allowed, housing loans, any cases where a member defrauded the employer and signs an acknowledgement of debt and sign next to that, the administrator will then use that to pay the employer. So only in those instances, and it only refers to defrauding the employer. You cannot hold money back as a board if the member simply owes the fund any money. It needs to be a case of fraudulent activities. I'm going to leave it at that. My throat is quite dry. I will send you the information that we have set out here in tonight's session. I'll try to guide you what is important, but I think there was a couple of things we took out that we can sort of focus on. I hope you made notes what that specifically was. I will commence with these sessions. Just stop the sharing. I will commence with these sessions then on Thursday at 3, and then next week Tuesday we will look at the same times. Then I will in the interim make sure I look at the content of your two modules and maybe just give you a short breakdown of what I believe you should cover. And also I will put the slides, I'll condense the slides for you and email that to you as well, but in PDF format. And I think we've done well. Congratulations, everyone. And thanks so much. I don't know if there's any comments. I haven't looked at my phone for any comments from you there. It kicked out again. So some members were struggling. So I'll try to condense the slides as well, the presentation. I don't know if there's anything some indication from your side?
How are you?
On you, Simpiwe.
No, I just want to check. You said you are going to send us the same information because of I've joined late.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I will try to break down for you the areas, but it's gonna be I'm gonna ask you then, yeah, you're gonna just to focus on and I'm asking each and every trustee if you can put in some time to get a good idea and an overview and be able to answer a question on the breakdown I give you. I will try to keep it condensed as possible, but I'm not sure what will come for us. But I need you to read through those modules. That's actually my asking from you. That would be great.
Okay, no, thanks.
Thank you, Simpiwe. Thanks for joining. I do appreciate your interest. I think it's a great turnout and I really enjoy it. I think we just need to get into the swing of things. It gave me a good idea of where we are and what we need to do. And I think it gives ourselves easy confidence to say, I don't like this. I think we should do it like that. So it's something that we will then take further and see how we can do that. Hello, Zen. You want to say something? Are you back online?
Yes, I'm back online. I
Good. How are
thank
you?
you so much.
You must be, it must be quite warm where you are.
Actually, tomorrow is going to be very cold, but today was warm. Yes.
Oh, good. Nice to hear your voice and nice to speak to each and every one of you. If there's nothing further, I will then see you in the same format next this Thursday already.
Yes, no problem. Thank you so much, Ami.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Appreciate. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye.
You too. Thanks a lot for attending. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.